Hello and welcome to another episode of A View from the Top. I'm Adrian Cropley. A View from the Top is a regular podcast from the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence, where I interview some of the world's leading communication professionals as we explore their career journey. I'm going to start my introduction in this episode by saying I am so pleased to be talking with a leading voice in employee communication, which is by no accident. In fact, it's the way that we're going to describe our guest today, Katie Macaulay, who is the host of the Internal Comms podcast. So now you get the link. Which, for those of you who have listened to the podcast, know that she has a knack for exploring a range of topics and guests from around the world that truly provide key insights into the practice of internal communication. So I'm a little nervous as well as excited to be welcoming Katie on board. But let me tell you a little bit about Katie, and then I'm going to introduce her. Katie's the managing director of an award-winning employee communication agency, which is called AB, as well as an international executive board member at the International Association of Business Communicators. It's no surprise that she's the author of her own book, From Cascade to Conversation, which challenges organizations to rethink how they communicate with their employees. It urges organizations, or it suggests that organizations lost control of the message if they ever had it in the first place. And you know I'm certainly going to ask Katie all about her book, but let me welcome Katie to A View from the Top. Welcome, Katie.
Adrian, thank you for that lovely, warm introduction. I am absolutely thrilled to be here.
Well, I love to set the scene a little bit so everybody knows who this is. I mean, mind you, if you say Katie Macaulay, most people in internal comms will know exactly who you are, and you're really
very kind.
Well, you make such a difference. And look, full disclosure to everybody that's listening, I've actually been a guest on Katie's podcast. And we've been trying to connect for such a long time to get each other on our podcasts. And so we just decided, let's do it. You know, can I say off the bat, thank you very much for what you do in our profession, Katie.
Thank you. I absolutely love it. But it's very kind of you to say that.
I can absolutely tell that you love it. It's, you know, and I said, I'm going to tackle this one first. And it's the quizzing you a little bit about your book. Tell me a little bit about the book, From Cascade to Conversation. Why did you decide to write the book?
It all came about, actually. I was writing a proposal to a fairly corporate client, and stuck in the middle of this proposal, once I'd listened to all of their challenges, the weaknesses that they had seen in their communication they wanted to address, I wrote this line, and I wrote, I believe we have to shift your communication from cascade to conversation. And when I reread this line a few times, and I thought to myself, Katie, who are you kidding here? This is a dramatic, strategic, difficult shift. And it's not only a shift this particular client needed to make, but so many other corporates that I'd seen. And I think really it grew out of this knowledge that, hand on heart, for many years in my career, I had seen organizations broadcasting messages at people on one-way channels. And the kind of tagline of the book is unlocking the collective wisdom of your workforce. And I had this idea that if we could shift to a more conversational, dialogue-based communication, not only would that be more engaging for the people working in the organization, it would also be better from a performance perspective for the organization. Because whether you're making products or delivering services, and I know this is a tried and hackneyed phrase, but your biggest asset really is your people. And actually, if you know anything about the way accounts are put together, it's probably the only asset you own that appreciates. So, exactly. Basic accountancy is that, assets depreciate over time. You end up writing them off. Look after your people, and they appreciate in value. They can give you your strategic edge and your competitive advantage if they engage their brains while working.
Wouldn't it be nice to have our accountants in organizations actually getting that concept? I think some are.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. Yes. So that was the genesis of the book, really.
I just love it, and I have to say it gives me goosebumps when you first talked about that quote and how that came about, having that conversation with a client, and it's just amazing to go, right, I need to take that concept and I actually need to turn it into a book, because you saw how wide this wasn't, and how things have changed over the years. Do you think we ever really had control over the message, or was it really just the organization's behaviors that we saw in play?
That's a really good question, I think, because there was an illusion of control. There was an illusion that because you owned the channels were all made and built and maintained by the corporate centre largely, that you had control of the message. What I think happened, and still happens in those types of organisations, there's far fewer of them now, that the conversations that needed to be had, the truthful, honest, open ones, were pushed to the fringes or pushed underground. And so the corporate centre probably didn't hear them, which is a really dangerous place to be. And I think now when we see things like Glassdoor, and there's other, obviously, platforms, and also when we see, to be honest, trade union activity and the conversations that can go on discussion forums in those kinds of organisations, outside the walls of the organisation, if you like, that is not where you want those conversations to take place. You can't then, input into them. You don't always see them. So yes, I think you're right. I think the control really was an illusion. I don't think the corporate centre really had it, if I'm being honest.
And I guess that control was really looking at the fact that when we didn't have channels in which people had a voice, so when we looked at social media today, where the voice is everybody's listening to the peer, and that's where the trust is, and all those. But when we didn't have those, it probably was a lot easier to control the narrative, because you, as you said, you're talking at people rather than talking with people or having a conversation.
But I think when I reflect on what was going on, so you're right, we thought we controlled the narrative, we pushed the narrative out. And often when there was silence from the audience and no one complained, we took that as a sign of success. So there really was no conversation. I think too much of our communication back then was perceived as propaganda. I don't think it was really compelling and believable. I think too much of it was ignored. So I don't think it works, because I think nowadays we know that the best content, the best narrative is co-created with the audience. And for that, you have to start listening first before you even write anything, I think.
And it's really interesting you use that word propaganda, and I remember vividly a conversation that I had with an employee when I first set up internal comms with Ericsson many years ago, and I started talking with great passion that I was in this new role in internal comms, and they literally looked at me straight in the face and said, oh, you've joined the department of propaganda. And I just went, oh
yes.
And then the more I thought about it, I thought, that's probably how this was all interpreted before, because before there was any employee or internal communication for the organization, it was all about people talking at their employees, and it mostly came from the leaders or the executive, right?
Exactly right. Absolutely. And thank goodness so much has changed.
Yes, that's what I think. So, but I'm sure it is a shock, as it is to me, that it would be a shock to you when you actually step into an organization, you realize, gee, they're still kind of operating in this mode. Boy, have I got my work cut out.
Yes, there's still too many of them, those kinds of organisations. And I have a phrase that I know my listeners will have heard before, which is that organisations get the communicators they deserve. So if you are working in an organisation where you're just deeply frustrated by the fact that you are still asked to broadcast stuff at people, there are other organisations now, thank goodness, many others that get it.
Yeah, thank heavens, and make the right career choice, I think. And that's, and that's what today's about. As I'm talking to you on A View from the Top, we're exploring careers. So I'm going to take you back a little way to the beginning of your career, and maybe even back when you were studying or you were at school and you decided this is what I wanted to do in my life. Where did this start for you? Did you study in communications and that was where you wanted to go, or where did you start?
I studied history
Ooh.
at Manchester University only because my parents were snobbish academics themselves and didn't believe that anything even remotely vocational was the right thing to do at university. You go to university to learn how to learn and do a serious subject. So I did a serious subject. So if you need to know about the development of working class consciousness from 1830 to 1905, then I'm your woman. But it doesn't come up very often. But nevertheless, no, it all started with a love of words. So from a very young age, I was writing constantly. And whether that was in my diary every night for sort of 15 years, or whether it was poetry or plays or whatever it was. And then largely because of Lois Lane, I have to blame Lois Lane, but growing up watching those Supermen movies, I realized there was this thing called journalism, and Lois's drive to get the story, to hold power to account. In the old days, we used to say to get your name above the fold, which meant, over the, where the broadsheet's laid out, you can see
the old broadsheet terminology. Yes. Oh boy.
So that was, and I thought Superman was vaguely ridiculous, underpants over a pair of tights, but Lois was where the action was. So I did try newspaper journalism for a while, and I also worked in other sort of marketing disciplines or communication disciplines, including actually investor relations.
All right.
But when I discovered internal comms, that was it for me. That was, I thought, aha. This is where the real action is. And I think that was because my first job out of university was actually with an agency that specialized in internal communications. And I spent those first very formative years, because I think they are when you come out of university and you really do know very little, and you realize very quickly how little you know, actually, which is quite my 18-year-old thinks he knows everything, but that will change as soon as he enters the workplace. The maturity is about really knowing how little you know in life. I spent a lot of time in workplaces and factories, and I remember going to a very old jam factory up north in London, in the sort of UK, but then a very modern dog food factory. It was very odd.
Oh, really?
I saw the first round tea bags being made by Tetley Tea Bag. But the whole thing was about, wow, this is business. This is how it works. And I can immediately see that communication is either the thing that impedes or encourages and accentuates performance.
Yeah.
And I think internal communication that could build bridges between people to really sort of, get under the skin of organizations. I just love the idea of being in this privileged position that we are in as internal comms people, seeing how businesses work and connecting people. So those 3 years set the scene, I guess, for my love of internal communications.
And isn't it nice you found that passion early after study, and you made that leap that basically says, hang on, there's words of power, but now I get the whole context of how we're influencing and changing people's lives in organization by communicating differently to employees. Must have been quite the penny drop kind of moment for you.
The penny dropped. It was very much so, yes.
But also to get the agency experience early. So, quite a lot of people start in the big corporates and maybe bit of agency work along the lines, but you started there early, so you got exposed to lots of varieties of organizations. What was the evolution from there? So you started in the agency. Where did you go to from there, and what kind of jobs did you do that helped progress your career?
So I literally went from the antithesis of that environment. So here was a creative agency, South London, lots of clients. I went and joined the London Stock Exchange in the Square Mile. So in London Square Mile. So this is the early 90s now. So we're probably about 94, something like that. So for people that don't know, the city of London is actually just a square mile in the heart of London. And traditionally for many years, it's financial heartbeats where the Bank of England is. It's where all the banks also had their head offices. It's moved slightly now to Canary Wharf. In those days, when I rocked up, I realized, oh my goodness me, there's a code for everything. There's a code for what you wear. There's a code for who pours the tea in meetings. There's a code for how you addressed people. I knew that one day I would end up back on the agency side. I knew that almost from sort of 48 hours of experiencing that. But at the same time, I was intrigued enough to stay in corporate life, probably for about 10 years. So AIM, the London Stock Exchange, when I was there, was launching a brand new market called AIM, the alternative investment market. And I was lucky enough to work on both the internal and external communications around that, which got me noticed by my boss's boss. So a couple of years after being at the stock exchange and realizing it was great grounding and good experience, thinking about my next move, my boss's boss moved to Barclays head office, literally round the corner. And she rang me up and said, look, I don't have a job for you, really. I haven't created one, but I know I want you here. I need you here. So for a while at Barclays, I was sort of minister without portfolio, which was... it was quite a nice way in a way, because you jumped around a bit. So I wrote and produced the annual report for a while. We had a massive global rebranding program. So I joined that program, which was fascinating. We went through an acquisition.
Wow.
There was lots of, it was, again, great grounding and seeing life inside a very big corporate, working with investor relations, media relations, marketing. Yes, it was all really exciting. I think, again, after a while, the whole corporate way of doing things, we used to have a phrase, and I don't think I'm talking out of turn here. I wondered whether I should reveal this, but Barclays, of course, like every large organization, will be much more agile than it used to be back then. But in those days, and if anyone's listening who remembers those days, because there's quite a few of us who have gone on to do other things, we used to have a phrase when we talked about trying to make change. We used to say, it's like pushing water uphill with a fork. And that just got to me after a while. And I sat down, I made a list of everyone I'd met over the few years when I'd been at the agency, when I'd been at the stock exchange, when I'd been at Barclays. It wasn't actually a long list. And I thought to myself, I'm going to go freelance. I'm going to ring everyone up. In those days, you did do those. You did literally ring people up. And I'm just going to tell the world that I'm freelance and it'll all be okay. So I walked boldly into my boss's office, said that I was leaving. She immediately said, what rival bank are you going to, Katie? And I thought, another bank is my least favorite option. Although, having said that, I suppose because of that financial services experience in my freelance career that then lasted almost a decade, I did work with other banks, but I also sort of strayed out into other areas as well. So yes, that's in a very shortened form. That's taken you through the next kind of 15 years or so, probably.
Wow. But it's interesting going from that agency world, then going into the corporate world and getting that grounding. But what I'm hearing is there's all these experiences that kind of set you up for that next step. So working in change and mergers, acquisitions, all of those things that kind of add to your kit bag of tools. And I guess because you knew you were going to go back into consulting at some stage, it was almost like you were there to collect all of that knowledge, experience, to then offer that back to other organizations through consulting. So did you jump? You went from Barclays and you did some freelance work. Did that then take you back into the agency world? Is this where you then moved into AB, or was there a step before that?
Yes. Yes, so after a few years of freelancing, which I loved, and I loved that variety as well, and being my own boss, it was time to, after having children, to probably think about another full-time permanent position somewhere. And
Yeah.
I knew that the agency world was going to be always probably my home. But the funny thing about my career, and I don't think many people know this, I'm not even sure whether everyone at AB knows this.
Oh, okay.
That
We're going to
first,
divulge here.
a big reveal. But that first job out of university all those years ago was with AB.
You're
And
kidding.
so I always think of myself as coming home. I now own and manage the agency that gave me my first job and my first big
Wow.
break when I left university. So it's
Talk,
wonderful. I have my dream job.
we talk about
Yeah.
life coming full circle.
Yes,
It isn't that
absolutely.
amazing? There's
So yes, never close the door.
no. I think there's a big lesson in there, isn't there, about be very careful of the bridges you burn, right?
Never burn a bridge. Never burn a bridge. And I can think of moments in my career where you're sometimes confronted about what is the smart thing to do here? Do I do I get really, really angry because maybe I feel in some way that I've been wronged or my team's been wronged? Or, there are moments in your career when you're tempted to burn a bridge because
Yes.
you feel so much in the right and this person should be told the truth.
Yeah.
And I've always thought to myself, do you know what? It's probably never worth burning that bridge. They will come to their senses and everything will be fine. And I've always been very sort of positively framed every experience, especially the goodbye experience. So I take exit interviews and things like that very, very seriously if anyone does leave AB. And I see that as a learning experience. So yes, never burn a bridge.
Look, and to be honest, I've seen people do it, and it never quite works because particularly in a small industry, sometimes like communications, you can burn a bridge, and somewhere along the line, it will come back to bite you. So it's good advice to our up and coming communication professionals is be careful, because look, the temptation always is, because when there's injustice or what you feel is wrongdoing, now it's not about not standing on principles, but it's also having that fine line between you're going to blow an organization up as you're leaving, or you're going to leave them with some good advice, and hopefully they're going to change as a result. And if they don't, that's their problem. There's plenty of other organizations.
Exactly. Absolutely.
So going back into now managing that, it's what excites you, when you get up in the morning and you're dealing with clients? What is it in the agency world that really kind of drives you?
I suppose to a degree it is the unknown. So you never quite know. We have a very broad range of clients across industry sectors. They all have their challenges as well as their incredible strengths. I think AB is slightly unusual, and I think why I love it so much is that I always say we think and we do, but as well as being the sort of the consultants and that with the researchers and the strategists, we also have a very strong creative team. So we do the thinking, but we also do the creation and the delivery as well. So I still get that love of creativity, of the words and of the words coming to life. Obviously, because it was formed in 1964. So I think we believe we're the world's oldest internal comms agency. Hopefully someone out there, Adrian, can tell you that I'm wrong, but no one's ever come to me with one that's older than 19.
Yeah, I doubt that very much.
Yes. It's a strange, the origin story. It gets its name from Anthony Buckley. So Anthony was actually publishing the Financial Times on Fleet Street in the early 60s, was watching people come and go to work, was looking at the professionalism he had at the Financial Times on Fleet Street. In those days, it was on Fleet Street, and thought, I wonder whether organizations, and particularly CEOs and managing directors, would like that same kind of professionalism for the way that they would be engaging their staff. And of course, they bit his hands off, and that's how the agency started. These days, of course, we're far from that ink on paper agency that we were in the beginning. So another wonderful thing is turning what might be something that could stop at a framework. If you're a consultant, you get to the kind of model framework position with your employee value proposition, or with the change communication, or with what the campaign key messaging might be. But for us, then it becomes, I was going to say collateral, but that's a very buzzword, but it becomes stuff. So it becomes a series of a podcast, or it becomes a microsite, or a series of campaign assets. It becomes employee briefing materials. And that's what I love. I love I still love seeing the stuff at the end as well. I get a real kick out of that.
Yeah, well, you get the buzz out of both, isn't it? And and it's interesting when you see so many people that have stuck just on the writing side or the creative side, but it sounds like what you've got there is it's the whole package. It's the strategic, it's understanding the outcomes that you want to get, but you still get to play with the creatives. And I think having that balance in life is really, really quite important.
Well, I think actually the lesson there, not just for, just not for AB and why, it works well for us, but I think for any in-house or external comms team, is that the creative is so much better when it's driven by insight and evidence.
Yeah.
So yes, you can come up with a brilliantly creative idea, but it might not be the right one. You might have solved the wrong problem because you didn't start understanding what the problem was in the first place. You didn't do your research, you didn't do your discovery, you didn't turn that into a piece of insight that then informed the creative brief that then helped the creatives get to where they wanted to go. So it's lovely because both sides of your brains working, but also I think better creative comes out of that process of joining the two things up as well, if I'm honest.
Yeah. So it's that full package, isn't it? And I think that's really great. What are some of the tips you would share with communication professionals, to really starting to offer value to the organizations that they work in?
Someone told me very early on in my career, always be very interested in what your boss is interested in. So whatever job I was given, I always saw that as just the starting point. What else was happening in the organization that was taxing my boss, or maybe her boss's boss? So the first piece of advice I would say is keep your head up. Yeah. And I mean that metaphorically and literally. Keep looking around you. Know how your work fits into the bigger picture. Know your business's customers and clients. Know the competition. Understand the mechanics of your sector. So whether you work in retail, oil and gas, there is underlying forces that shape how your sector operates. And if you don't understand them, you can get those reports for free. Just go to KPMG's website, EY, PwC, they all do those up-to-date sector reports. Read the business news as well. And if you work for a publicly listed company, what's moving the share price? What is the share price? So yes, keep always being interested in what your boss's boss is interested in. Keep your head up. I'd say number one piece of advice.
Brilliant.
The second one is read the classics. So the classics in our business. So it's not Shakespeare, I'm afraid. I'm not going to give you that.
I'm going to Gone with the Wind, right?
Yes, if only. But honestly, just as helpful. So for me, people like Jim Collins, Peter Drucker, John Cotter, even Stephen Covey. Actually, I think I've got a public list on Amazon, Adrian. So I'll send you the list so that people can see this list of books. But, for I don't know, £8.99, £15 or whatever, talking in English pounds here. But you can read, the brilliant wisdom of people that have been there and done it before. And these are still highly relevant and highly useful. So read the classics. Be really curious about the job that you're given to do. I remember the first time working on a branding program, I went out and I bought books about visual identity. I learned about how brands are valued. I read about John Hegarty, people like that has sort of been the pioneers of modern branding. So be really curious about what you're given to do. I also think attitude is really important. So it's not just how you deliver the work that you're doing, but the way that you deliver it. I used to have an ops director that used to say to me before we went into a pitch, never forget, Katie, people buy people. So,
I love it.
You can have all the ideas and the price might be right, but does that person really want to work with you? That we were talking about never burning a bridge. But I think just being very lovely to deal with actually counts for a lot. And, to be fair, we talk about our front line and the importance of customer service, but internal customer and client service is just as important. So, yes. And keep learning. And that's a very obvious and trite thing to say. We all do this, don't we? We meet people. I've had 30 years experience in this industry, and they haven't. Yeah. They've had 1 year and they've repeated it 30 times. So keep looking for the new thing, keep learning. But I would also say, and someone asked me this the other day, he said, I'm keen on learning, and I understand how that you've got to build that into your processes. And I thought you have got to build that learning into your processes. So I do is if I come across something interesting, like a new framework or model or piece of research, I blog about it, I share it with a colleague, I'll test it out with a client. So turn whatever knowledge you stumble across into a skill by trying to apply it, even in a small way. I think that's quite helpful practice as you go through your career as well.
Yeah. So fabulous tips. I have to, before we close, I have to talk about your podcast, because it is, quite obvious why you're the voice of employee communication, without a doubt. But tell me, what inspired you to start your podcast?
I think there was a little bit of a secret, I almost want to say fear. Maybe that's a too strong a word, but after a few years, there is that slight worry, I guess, that you might start to rely on what you've always known to do your job rather than what you still need to learn and discover. So part of it was born by sheer selfishness. I thought this would give me an excuse, a license to reach out to really interesting people, to have interesting conversations. And I guess go back to that little bit of the love of journalism, because it is that. It's about researching somebody, finding out what questions to ask, asking them in such a way that you're getting their brains to stop and think and really ponder what the answer is.
Yeah.
My goal with every podcast is there should be a moment when someone says, "Oh, no one's ever asked me that before," or "That's a good question." And for a moment, they're not quite sure what the answer is and they have to think about it. And so I always aim for that with the show. So it is a little bit of selfishness, but then very early on, even on the day that we launched, actually, now I would say this, we didn't go through all the best practice that we would tell a client to do. So hand on heart, we thought we'd give it a go and see what would happen. And that's not what we would ever say to a client, unless we were going for the very agile test and learn, fail fast approach. So, but it was that for us. And I thought, well, I would scratch this itch, and it was the bright, shiny new thing, which my management team will say that I'm always very attracted to. And I'll say that's probably quite true. We'll do 3 or 4 episodes. My mum and my sister, I could bribe them to listen. But that day that we launched, we ended up at number 9 in the iTunes new and noteworthy
that's just
charts.
Wonderful.
And we looked at each other and we thought, who knew? Who knew there is an audience out there keen to learn about how we improve communications in the workplace? Who knew? And we're on episode 70 nearly, I think now. I check the stats once a week, roughly. So we get, I think we're at nearly 300,000 downloads.
Oh, that's amazing.
Some of the episodes have had more than 20,000 listens, which is just incredible. The other big surprise for me is that we are listened to literally in more than 55 countries around the world. So our biggest market is actually America, then the UK, then Canada, then obviously Australia, New Zealand, all the places you'd expect from a language perspective.
Yes.
But also we have listeners literally in almost every other country around the world. So I am very humbled by those figures. I tend to forget them when I'm in the moment of actually recording a show. So
because the pressure's too much.
It would paralyze you. I have in mind one person I might have met, the last person that I met that said they loved the show, I just have that person in mind. And I think of them as my audience of one, if you like, and try to think, how am I going to please him or her? That's the way I get over that pressure. But yes, it's become probably one of my most, favorite things to do, actually, of my working life, I think.
And I can tell just listening to your episodes too. I mean, you have fun what you're doing, and you're a natural, Katie. I really, and that's why I love talking to you. And it's, when I look at the way that you stepped into it, if it's any consolation, I did exactly the same thing because I had no idea what was going on, and I looked at myself as the crusty older person that went, oh, let's give this podcasting a try, and hopefully somebody will listen to it. And I do exactly the same. I don't ever want to think there's anybody other than me and the person that I'm talking to, and we're just having a conversation. Otherwise, it gets a little bit too daunting.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and it's a great part of my working life, I have to say.
Well, please keep doing it, Katie, and please keep being who you are. I mean, that it's so good to listen to your career journey from where you went to. And I think there used to be an ad on TV that was for Gillette, and it had the person that said, I loved the product so much I bought to the company.
Yes.
I almost think that's your journey. Is you
Yes.
started the agency and went, agency world's for me. So I went and did all of this stuff, and then I went back and I just decided to take on that company and buy it for myself. Well done, you.
Always dream big. That's what I would say.
Did you ever get that ad in the UK, the Gillette ad?
Yes.
Yes. You did. So you know the one I'm talking about.
I bought the company.
Yes,
I absolutely remember that.
That was the big line, and there'll be a lot of folks that are listening, going, probably, not one I remember. They're too young. So thank you, Katie. We're so far out of time, and I am so appreciative of you joining me today, and taking us through your career.
Thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I loved it.
It was a lot of fun, and thank you, and thanks again to everyone for tuning in to A View from the Top. Stay tuned for our next episode of A View from the Top, coming up very shortly. Thanks for joining us today. Take care, everyone.